Animal haq. What type of word? An ismun. Right? If you find a word rather, which is majrurun or makhfudun, with this indicator on it, then you know that that is an ismun. Right? So that's unique to an ismun. It's not present on a fi'lun or a harfun. Right? So that one's simple. Okay? So the first indicator is that it is al-khafdu. So if I say waladin, not that that would be grammatically correct regardless, but is waladin al-kalamu according to the grammarians, ya Animal haq?
Sorry?
Is waladin considered to be kalamun? No. Right? Because even though it's a lafdu, it's not al-murakkabu, it's not al-mufidu, is it?
No.
Similarly, if we say baytin, what type of word is baytin? An ismun. If I say that according to the indicators that we've mentioned, how do we identify that it is an ismun?
It is al-khafdi.
Right, al-khafdu. Right, or al-jarru, whichever you choose to use. The point to note is that's the indicator. And that's quite a simple indicator, right? There's nothing complicated about that, inshallah. So we'll refer to al-khafdu as al-jarru. The other point to note, it's probably worthwhile mentioning it. We have already mentioned when an ismun can become majrurun. Right? We've already mentioned it during the course of our lessons. We mentioned 3 instances when an ismun can become makhfudun according to Ahlul Kufa or majrurun according to Ahlul Basr. What are those 3 instances when an ismun can become majrurun?
First off, let's proceed by al-jar.
Right. If we have huruf al-jar such as bi, right? I mean, this is mentioned earlier on, but it's later on, but it's worthwhile mentioning here. He mentions it here, huruf al-khafdi. But because we've already studied this, it's interesting to note that there are 3 instances in which an ismun can become majrurun. The first is with a harfu jarrin. What's the second most common instance where an ismun can become majrurun? When it is the
mudaf ilayhi.
Right, good, ya Animal haq. So an example of an idafa is
Kitabu waladin.
right, but we'll use ismullahi.
Ismullahi.
Right?
Or kitabullahi.
So ismullahi. We know that the mudafun ilayhi in an idafa is always majrurun, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if we add ismullahi to bi, what does it become?
Bismillahi.
Right. Bismillahi. Right? So now we have 2 instances of
Majrurun.
an ismun which is majrurun. The first as a result of a harfu jarrin bi, and the second being because it's the mudafun ilayhi. The third instance in which an ismun can become majrurun is when? We've also mentioned this too. Remember the agreement between what? Between an ismun and a sifatun. What's one of the rules of agreement? There are 4. What's one of them?
It has to match with the alamatun.
Right, it has to match in the i'rabun.
Yeah.
So if your ismun is marfu'un, your sifatun has to be marfu'un. And if your ismun is mansubun, your sifatun has to be mansubun. And if your ismun is majrurun or makhfudun, then your sifatun has to be majrurun. So if we wanted to describe Allah Azza wa Jalla as Ar-Rahman, and we placed it here, Ar-Rahman,
then it has to be majrur.
then what goes on the noon?
Kasra.
Right, it has to be al-khafdu or al-jarr. Why? Because Ar-Rahman is now a na'atun or a sifatun of Allah.
Allah majrur there.
Right? And Allahu Azza wa Jalla, here the ismun is majrurun. Therefore Ar-Rahmani has to be majrurun. And if we wanted to describe Allahu as Ar-Rahim, then Ar-Rahim enters here. And what happens? Rahimi. Why Ar-Rahimi? Because Ar-Rahimi is a na'tun or a sifatun of Allahi, and Allahi is majrurun. Therefore Ar-Rahimi also has to be majrur. So the basmala, right? The basmala that we all know, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, has all 3 reasons or causes of an ismun becoming majrurun. Right? The harfu jar, the mudafun ilayhi, and the sifatun. That's called at-tabi'iyatu. At-tabi'iyatu. Right? At-tabi'iyatu means in following. It has to agree in following. So if you remember from our lesson last week, if I say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, is that considered to be al-kalamu amongst the grammarians?
Yeah.
Yes. Why?
So all these 3 consist of the kalam is in there.
No. No. Yeah. And what do you mean all these 3? That's a harfun. We have harfun. Allahi is an ismun. Ar-Rahman is an ismun. And Ar-Rahim is... No, that's not. Remember, al-kalamu al-lafdhu. Al-lafdhu. Al-murakkabu al-mufidu bil-wadi. So if I say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, is that considered to be al-kalamu according to what Ibn Wajurum said?
Yeah.
Why yes? No.
There's no feeling there.
No, Ya Num al-Haq. No. Right, remember that in order for it considered to be al-kalamu, it has to be al-lafdhu, articulated upon the tongue. When I articulate it, is it therefore al-lafdhu?
Yeah.
Yes. It has to be al-murakkabu, meaning comprising of 2 or more words, is it?
It is.
It has to be al-mufidu. Al-mufidu meaning yahsunu as-sakutu alayhi, that it's correct for me to stop at that point and you derive a beneficial meaning. So if I say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim and I stop at that point, are you content with what you've heard?
No, something's
No, that's right.
Because
something's missing. That in it of itself does not convey al-kalam, which is al-mufidu, even though it is bil-wadi in Arabic. Why? Why? Because
something else.
Something's missing. Right? You're waiting for something else. And that something which is missing is, remember, as we mentioned, Safra should remember this because we used to speak about this about 15 odd years ago. In the beginning of the explanation of Usul al-Thalatha and Aqidat al-Wasatiyya, what did Shaykh Muhammad ibn Salih al-Uthaymeen say about the Basmala? It's muta'alliq bifi'lin mahdhufin متأخر مناسب للمقام. Remember, he said that the basmala is connected to a fi'l, an action which is mahdhuf, which is erased. It's appropriate, it's delayed, meaning it comes after, because the fi'l usually comes first, remember. So it comes afterwards. And munasib lil maqam, and it's appropriate to the situation, meaning before you start to read Al-Quran, you say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, and then if you were to articulate in words your action, what would you say?
Bismillah.
No, you said that, but what would you say then? Aqra'u.
Something else, yeah.
You would say Aqra'u, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Aqra'u. Or if you're going to eat, what would you say? Akulu. Right? Or whatever the action is. Right? The point to note that if you were to articulate it in words after al-basmala, you would say Aqra'u or Akulu. Right? You remember this phrase. That's why he, rahimahullah, said that the basmala, it's understood that it refers to actions. Actions that are not mentioned upon the tongue, but it's performed by your limbs. So remember that what we mentioned last week, remember when I said, gave you the example, kataba, is, if I say kataba, is that al-kalamu according to the definition of Ibn Ajrumiyyah? Yanum al-haq. No. Right, okay, if it's, right, okay. Is it al-lafdhu? It is al-lafdhu. Is it al-murakkabu, meaning comprising of two or more words? Right, so do the i'rabun of kataba. Let's do the i'rabun to prove whether or not you're right. Kataba is what? Say it. Fi'lun madin mabniyun ala al-fathi. Fa'iluhu, its doer is?
It's not present.
Mustatirrun, hidden. Taqdiruhu, it's assumed to be huwa. It's assumed to be huwa. Isn't it? Remember? Okay. Similarly, if we say yak tu bu na, yaktubuna. So what is its fa'il? What's the fa'il on of yaktubuna? Al-waw. Al-waw. So, I mean, if you don't understand that, you will when we get to the section on afal. But the point to note is both kataba and yaktabuna, right? They have the fa'ilun, don't they? They have the fa'ilun, the doer. So remember that when we say al-murakkabu, meaning comprising of two or more words, those, one of the words can be a taqdiri, assumed to be there, like huwa, can't it? So when you say kataba, who's the doer? Huwa. It's just mustatirun. Therefore, I ask you again, Ya Anam al-Haq, is kataba al-kalamu inda nuhati, amongst the grammarians? Is it considered to be al-kalamu?
Yeah.
Yes.
Because it's got a thing two.
Because it does comprise of two or more. It's just that one of them is mustatirun. It's hidden. Therefore, right, the bit in al-basmala the portion that we need in order to complete
A sentence.
the lafdhu, in order for it to be al-mufidu, وَيَحْسُنُ السَّكُوتُ عَلَيْهِ, is the bit which is assumed to be there. You understand, Safraz? That's the bit that's assumed to be there. So therefore, as the Shaykh Rahimahullah said, he mentions this example in al-Ajrumiyyah, his explanation of it. He mentions that the basmala, it is al-kalamu according to the definition of the grammarians, because this part is
Mustatir. Hidden.
is assumed to be there. In fact, you know, even the basmala, there are about 8 different types of i'rab that can be applied to it. Right? So not all of them, for example, say Bismillahir Rahmani Ar-Rahimi, some of them are Ar-Rahima, and some of them are Ar-Rahmana and Ar-Rahima. But that's because they assume certain af'alun to be there, right? But it's not that common, and we don't want to confuse anyone. So we'll just stick to Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, right? So why did we mention all of that? Because al-khafdu is the first indicator that
Of ismun.
it's an ismun. Right? We'll just quickly do the second, at-tanween. Right. At-tanweenu. What is at-tanweenu? This bit's easy. It's an-nunu az-za'idatu fil ismi lafdhan wala khattan, meaning it's the noon which is in extra at the end of an ismun, lafdhan wala khattan. It's pronounced but not written. For example, our favorite ismun, kitabun. Historically, right, that's how they would write kitabun. Even from the earliest days of the sending of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in their writings, that's how asma'un would be written. Remember, I said that at-tanweenu is a-nunu az-za'idatu, an additional noon. Fil ismi, in the noun, lafdun wala khattan, it's pronounced but not written. Can you see? Right? Here, the noon is present, isn't it? But if we remove the noon, so we still pronounce it, but we don't write it, what happens? We say kitabun, don't we? Yeah. So we've dropped the noon, which is why it's lafdhan wala khattan, it's not written, and we've substituted it for a dammah, which represents the actual tanween. It's not correct, it's a slight misconception to say that these two markings here are at-tanweenu. It's not correct to say that that is the tanween. The tanween is the second one. Not both of them. It's the second, because it's the second one which replaces the noon. You see, Safraz, the second one. Now, once we've understood that, we know that there are three types, aren't there? Yeah. We can say kitabun, and you can say what? If you want to make it mansubun, kitaban. You can say kitaban. Kitaban. But in order for it to be correct and be kitaban, what must have happened?
Something is to...
Something, there's an amilun. Something's affected it. What would have affected it in order for it to become kitaban?
Is fi'lun.
A fi'lun such as?
Kataba.
Kataba. We know this. Kataba kitaban. Right, so Yanim al-Haqq, do the i'rabun of kataba kitaban quickly. فعل ماض مبني على الفتح right فاعله مستتر تقديره هو كتابا مفعول به منصوب وعلامة نسبه. The indicator of it being mansoob is Tanween al-Fathi. Right? So that's kitaban. So the third and final is kitabin. Kitabin. Right? So in order for that to be correct, what must have happened? Right, good. Fi. This one's easy, right? Fi harfu jarrin. Kitabin is ismun majrurun. Or the other way that the grammarians describe is the easy way. Jarun wa majrurun. And that is called shibhu jumlatin. Shibhu jumlatin, meaning resembling a sentence. But the point to note is we have kitabun. So we said that that is tanweenu dammin. Tanweenu dammin. It's kitaban is tanweenu fathin, and kitabin tanweenu kasrin. Now, as we mentioned right at the beginning, according to the rules of speech, when you stop at the word, if it is marfu'un or majrurun, then you don't pronounce the final harakatun. So we say kitab. And we say fi kitab. But when it's mansubun, okay, then you pronounce it with a single fatha. Kataba kitaban. Right? Why do we violate that rule? Why at the very beginning did I say we're not going to adhere to that rule? Because when you're learning, you have the whole purpose of Arabic grammar is to know how the ending changes. And if you ask somebody a question and they're allowed not to pronounce the ending, then it becomes easy, right? Then they can just stop at that point and you don't know whether they've actually understood it correctly because they didn't pronounce the last harakatun, right? And in fact, Dr. V. Abdurrahim, Hafidhahullah, who wrote the Medina series, he mentions in his autobiography, or a short autobiographical account, that when he first started teaching Arabic in Medina University, he did the same thing. He told them that we're always going to pronounce the last vowel on the letter, so you know whether or not you're speaking it or reading it correctly. So that is what we understand to be a tanweenu. Now, the interesting bit is there are 8 types of a tanween. There's 8 types, right? We are only going to mention the first 4. The first 4 meaning the most common. So the first type of tanween is called tanweenu at-tamkeen. Right? Why tamkeenu at-tamkeen? Why are there different types? Even if we discuss and mention four, why did the grammarians speak about different types of tamkeen? The reason being is they analysed grammar to such an extent and codified it in such a precise manner that even with regards to asma'un, nouns, they wanted to differentiate between the level of ismiyah, right? Meaning to what extent does that ismun agree or adhere to the rules that identify it as being an ismun, right? It's a bit like when you're distributing your inheritance. There are different levels of people who are entitled to different shares, right? Similarly, in terms of identifying an ismun, they have different levels. So the highest level is called a tamkeen, where absolutely, without any doubt, this ismun, it's present or made manifest upon it the signs of it being an ismun. For example, at-tamkeen. What is tanween at-tamkeen? An example of tanween at-tamkeen is our commonly used ismun kitabun. Right? Kitabun. Any ismun which takes tanweenu dammin at the end, right, that isn't of the other types that we're going to mention, that, they said, is tanweenu tamkini, the highest level of an ismun, right? So it's not possible at all that this ismun can have any of the characteristics that can be present in the other two types of words, right? So kitabun, babun, masjidun, jidarun, baytun, they're all of the highest level. Right. Now you're probably wondering what the benefit of this is. The benefit is that the second type is a tankir. Tankir. Tanweenu tankir. What is tanweenu at-tankir? Right. What that means is that now the word is going to take a tanween and it's going to be manifest upon two types of different words. So in Arabic there is something called ismu fi'lin. Ismu fi'lin, meaning a noun of an action. So if you say this word to a person, you want them to perform an action, but the word itself is an ismun. For example, no, right? That sah, sah, right? Sah. In Arabic, it means be quiet, uskut. That is an ismun, it's not a fi'lun. The fi'lun is uskut. It's used for commands, by the way, as it's probably obvious. So, sah, if you say it to somebody, it means you want that person to be quiet. Right? It's an ismu fi'lin lil amri. It's a noun that represents an action for a command. But this is the interesting bit. Watch this, right? If you say sahin, sahin, right? What have I done? What's the difference between sah and sahin? What's the difference between the ending? Sorry?
That's the kasra, and the other one is
Yeah, but that has a tanween on it, right?
yeah.
Right. Munawwanun or munawwanatun, right? Munawwanatun, it means it's got a tanween on it. So when you say that kalimatun, munawwanatun, right? Munawwanatun, we need to get used to that word. It means that it has a tanween on it. So the difference between sah and sahin is that sahin has tanweenu kasran on it, as is obvious, right? But what's the difference in meaning? If you say to somebody sah, it means you be quiet. If you say to somebody sahin, it means you be quiet absolutely. I don't say anything else. So if there's somebody here talking about what they did yesterday, right, a particular subject, and you say to them sah, it means you want them to stop talking about that thing. If you address that person and you say sahin, it means that's it. You want them to stop talking about everything. Right? Now there are a number of words like that in Arabic, like mah and mahin. Right? That means stop. Mah just means stop what you're doing. Mahin means absolutely stop everything you're doing. The other one that you will know is uffin. You know that word, uffin, in Al-Quran, in Surah Al-Isra, right? And in Surah Al-Anbiya, uffin lakum wa lima ta'buduna min dunillah, the statement of Ibrahim. And in Al-Isra, la takul lahuma uffin, do not say to them uffin. Uffin, that is also ismu fi'lin, and it's used to censure or rebuke somebody, which is why you're told not to say it to your parents. But Ibrahim alayhi salam said it to his people. قَالَ تَعْبُدُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ مَا لَا يَنْفَعُكُمْ وَلَا يَضُرُّكُمْ أُفٍّ لَكُمْ وَلِمَا تَعْبُدُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ. Right? He said uffin. He said to them, to censor and rebuke them. Right? So as I said, we're going to mention 4. The other 2 are more straightforward. But the point to note, right, is that, as I said, the whole purpose of this is that the grammarians are concerned about the grammar of the Arabic language, just like any specialist in their field of speciality. And they analysed it to the extent that even with regards to asma'un nouns, they wanted to differentiate between the highest level of ismun, which is the one that they said has tanweenu tamkeen on it, and the lowest level, right? Which is why the second category is a tankir, because it doesn't get to a tamkeen. Or rather, the next category is. Right? I did want to complete this, but obviously it's not going to happen. So, are there any questions? Then we shall conclude. Subhanaka Allahumma bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.